On today's episode of Coding with Kate, we are going to be talking about ICD-10-CM, the Diagnosis Codebook. This book is an integral part of, or one of the integral parts of coding the medical record. This codebook literally has any diagnosis and variation of diagnosis you could ever imagine. That's why it's so big. But to look at the breakdown of this book, in the very beginning, in the red section, they have information of how this codebook works, what conventions they use, meaning what terms like code also, code with, excludes one, excludes two. These are all things that you will learn in your coding courses. But in the red section, that is one of the places where you'll find that information, along with a breakdown of each chapter and any guidelines that fall within it that will help you learn how to code those sections and those diagnoses. The next section, the big black section here, that is your alphabetic index. That is the first place you will look when you start to code. Within the diagnosis in the op report, you want to look for the main term or the type of illness, ailment, etc., like disease, infection, or any specific type of illness. You need to find that main term, look for it in the alphabetic index. And also, if there are specific names like Crohn's disease, you can look under Crohn's or you can look under disease. Either way, you will find that. From there, you can look down under the subterms to find any other specific information that define that main term for your specific diagnosis you are coding for, and it will give you the first three characters of the code. Once you go into the tabular list, there are several chapters that cover body systems and what diseases, illnesses, and diagnoses are commonly associated or found in that body system. There are also chapters that cover the environment in which the diagnosis happened, or just other information like, was it an injury that happened via gunshot wound? Is the woman pregnant, and what information describes her pregnancy, gestation period, etc. So there's a lot of additional information that you'll find more towards the back of the code book to help further describe the diagnosis. And once you go into whichever chapter, then you can find more information and more detailed information about the diagnosis. So then you can fill in your entire code. So the code can be up to 7 characters long. The first 3 is the category, which is essentially the title of the chapter. Then we have a decimal point. And then once you're in the tabular list, the rest of this information is what you need to fill in to make sure it's complete. And remember, we need to code to the highest degree of specificity and detail. So the next 3 characters talk about the etiology, the anatomic site, or the severity. You don't need to know which numbers are which. They will give you that information, but this describes the next 3 characters if all 3 are needed or given. And then the 7th character, that is the character that provides even more information for certain diagnoses. If it is the first occurrence, second or third occurrence, and other things that help describe that diagnosis. If you are given a code that only has 4 characters, but it needs a 7th character, ICD-10-CM uses a placeholder or an X. So you put the X in the 5th and 6th character, and then add in whichever 7th character the book tells you to use. And that is how you complete your code. But know that in some or even most instances, a 7th character is not needed, and you're only given 4 or 5 or 6 characters. That is okay. Don't freak out. It does not have to be 7 characters long. But make sure you look at the guidelines within each chapter and with that specific diagnosis you're looking for, because it will give you information of how to make that code complete. Now I have an example of how to navigate the code book. In your courses, you will be given a practice book that gives instructions and detailed information on how to code, and within there you will be given exercises on how to search for certain terms, how to pinpoint what is the main term, and then also how to find the code, etc. So from my exercise book, I am choosing one that I think is a good example of how to search from the alphabetic index to the tabular list. And this one also requires multiple codes, so you can see in the code book where it tells you also code for, etc. It gives you that notation that you need another code for this. And it also helps with sequencing the code, which codes need to be first and then second and third, which is also helpful because in diagnosis coding, the sequencing is very important. And you'll learn more about why. So this example is acute suppurative peritonitis due to E. coli. So the main term, we need to figure out what is the type of illness, and it says peritonitis. That is a main term. There can be several different types of peritonitis. Acute is just describing what level of severity the peritonitis is. Suppurative is the type of peritonitis, or another type of. And due to E. coli, that is what caused the peritonitis. So peritonitis is our main term. So in the alphabetic index, we go to P, peritonitis, and then we look at the subterms below peritonitis, and we want to look for acute or suppurative. Either one. I suggest when you're learning to look for both and see if it takes you to the same place or not. If it takes you to two different places, then I would suggest going to both, because you want to code to the highest level of specificity and detail, and having those two codes to compare which one matches as closely as possible to the diagnosis in the op report. It's very important to do that. But since I thought ahead, when you look under acute and suppurative, it brings you to the same code. So under peritonitis, you can see that on the top, and then look for suppurative, and it tells you K65.0. If you also look under acute, it gives you the same exact code, K65.0. So then we go to our tabular list under K, and the tabular list is in alphabetical order. And this section is a dark blue, and the chapter is chapter 11, diseases of the digestive system. So this is a diagnosis that happens within or is commonly associated with the digestive system. And then from there, the numbers in that code are in numerical order. So we want to go a little bit halfway through the K section to find K65.0. 65.0. And it is that bottom section right there where it says diseases of peritoneum and retroperitoneum, K65 through K68. Then it says K65 peritonitis. Now, it gives us in red letters a note that we need the second code. So it says right there, use additional code B95 through B97 to identify infectious agent. And we already know that our diagnosis said due to E. coli, which is our infectious agent. So this section already told us you need to use K65.0, and we need to get more specific on the rest of that code. And then we also need to refer to the infectious agent and put that code as well. And since it said use additional, the infectious agent code will come second. If it had to go first, it would have clearly said code first. So here we have our sequencing. K65.0 comes first, and then our infectious agent in the B section will come second. So then we read down, and it tells you excludes one, which is you cannot use this diagnosis if anything on this list it gives is also in the report. It tells you you can't put them together. You have to pick one. And then you will have to go and figure out which one it is, or find a new diagnosis that is more detailed and is the better option. But with this one, we don't have that problem. So we go to case 65.0, it says generalized or acute peritonitis. And then it also lists the different types like pelvic peritonitis, acute for male, subphrenic peritonitis, acute, and then suppurative peritonitis, acute. That's what we need. And then we'll also look down the rest of the list to make sure there is not another code that is more closely associated or describes the diagnosis that we have. And looking at the rest of them, case 65.0 is the closest diagnosis code we can use for this. Now, as you can see, we have case 65.0, and they didn't give us anything else for the last 3 characters. So we don't need to put those in because there's no other notation that states you need a 7th character. And there is no other subcategory to give us those extra numbers. So we stick with case 65.0. And then with the note saying use additional code for the infectious agent, we need to go to section B to B95 through B97 to find our infectious agent or E. coli. The section is in green. It says Chapter 1, Certain Infectious and Parasitic Diseases. B95, the number 95 is almost to the end of the section. It says bacterial and viral infectious agents. And from there, we'll read through what that note says, and then we'll also look for E. coli and figure out what code we need. So in that note, it says these categories are provided for use as supplementary or additional codes to identify the infectious agents in diseases classified elsewhere. Keep this in mind, that if I'm reading this note correctly, learning experience happening right now, that is telling me that this range of codes, B95 through B97, cannot be put as your principal diagnosis. I think that's correct. I will need to go back and check. So we look down into the subterms and the subcategories until we find E. coli. So it's not in the B95 section. Let's go to the B96 section. Other bacterial agents as the cause of diseases classified elsewhere. All right, I found E. coli. I'm going to admit I do not know how to actually correctly pronounce the full term, but I found E. coli, the thing we need to know. And it also has in brackets E. coli. So just in case you don't know what the full name is or know how to spell it or pronounce it, it says E. coli, thankfully. So E. coli is B96.2. Now, once we look at B96.2, it says E. coli as the cause of diseases classified elsewhere. There are also even more subterms below that we need to look at that will give a 5th character if it's needed. So we must look. Since none of those match what our diagnosis said, we have to stick with B96.2. B96.20. And as you can see, the last 2 characters are not filled in because they did not give us one. It also did not give a note of a 7th character, so we leave that blank. And then you will look back at your op report, look at your diagnosis, make sure there aren't any other pieces of information that need to be coded using diagnosis codes. And then since we have to put it in the correct order, the correct sequencing, our main diagnosis, the peritonitis, goes first, and then our infectious agent code goes second. And that is what we will put on our form. And that is diagnosis coding. So that was a fairly easy one. I will say there are quite a few that I still am not sure about, like sepsis, HIV, diabetes, and then some of the diagnoses that deal with the heart. Those have very specific guidelines that I'm still working on. The guidelines do give you a step-by-step of if this is shown or if this is recorded, do this, look at this, put this first. So they do give you a step-by-step, but it's still a little confusing. Sepsis can be very confusing for me. So I make a lot of notes and I look at examples to see which sequence they used. So it's a lot of getting used to and figuring out what you need to do to make sure you have the sequencing correct, because that is very important. And you can always talk with your professors and reach out to other coding professionals who can give you more guidance on that. And once you are in the field and you are a certified coder, You can always talk with other coders or your manager, or even go on to one of the health information management associations and look under their forums where you can ask questions if you are unsure about coding something and you can't find the answer at your facility. So there's many resources that can give you guidance, so then you can continue learning and make sure you're coding correctly. Hopefully that was interesting. The next video that I will be making is on PCS coding, which is inpatient hospital procedural coding, which is my favorite type of procedural coding. I love it, and I can't wait to do that video. So I will see you then.